Kevin and his team earned the trust of Q, Quentin Covington's son and lieutenant, by helping him escape the Tokyo police officers, who raided the underground BattleBot Club. Unaware of who Kevin is, Q invited Kevin and Zara back to his Tokyo penthouse apartment, where they met his robot butler Jeeves and his pregnant girlfriend Anata. Anata lured Kevin away to the penthouse's rooftop garden and revealed that she knew his true identity. Anata raised her chin and looked at Kevin defiantly. She was a petite woman with a very large pregnant belly. The warm Tokyo wind made the silk of her kimono robe flap and ruffle at the hem of her silken pajamas. "Of course I recognized you, Kevin Williams," she crowed. "Quentin Covington sent me a folder on you and all of your most important associates weeks ago." Kevin glared down at Anata. "Q didn't show any signs that he knows who I am." "Of course he didn't. Q is a brilliant engineer, a gifted computer programmer, and an inspired leader. Quentin wanted Q to concentrate on his work at the robotic factory and not be distracted by minor details like a Chicago hoodlum like you trying to interfere in his master plans." Anata put her hands on her hips. "The real security concerns were left to me." Kevin covered his surprise. "So does that mean that you're actually Q's bodyguard and Quentin's operational security specialist here in Tokyo? Are you just pretending to be in love with Q?" Kevin looked pointedly at Anata's belly. "Is that even really his baby?" Anata glared at Kevin and hissed like a cat. "Don't you dare say anything like that about my baby, Kevin Williams. This baby is Q's. There was never any doubt about that." She stroked her belly lovingly. Kevin softened his tone, understanding immediately. "Then you really are in love with Q." Anata looked away, slightly embarrassed. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but we fell in love. He's the kindest, sweetest, most decent man I've ever met. Maybe he's too trusting sometimes." She turned her back on Kevin. "Which is why I'm not going to let you do anything to hurt him, physically or in the eyes of his father." Kevin didn't want to mock the security specialist turned girlfriend turned mother-to-be, but the woman barely came up to his shoulder. It was almost laughable. If she truly knew who Kevin was, she must know that Kevin had already made his way through hundreds of Quentin's guards and soldiers and toppled more than one of his compounds. "Well, what is it that you think you can do to stop me?" Kevin wondered aloud. Anata smiled in a way that Kevin didn't like. Was there something here that he was missing? He reached out with his senses and his mind. There it was. Anata had levels. That made sense. A lot of Quentin's other security personnel were also experts, but Anata was a level 3 at best. Something still didn't make sense. Kevin shook his head. "I know you have levels, Anata, but I'm a level 7. You're no match for me. And don't think that I'll let you stop me from my mission just because you're pregnant. I can think of a dozen ways to neutralize you with absolutely zero risk to you or the baby." Anata took a phone out of her kimono robe's pocket and tapped a few keys. "Oh, it's not just me you have to worry about. You also have to worry about them." The door of a garden shed tucked in the corner of the balcony suddenly rolled up and opened. 4 robots, each the size of a sumo wrestler, stepped from the garden shed. "Q hasn't just been working on robots for construction purposes," Anata explained. "That's just his latest assignment from his dad. These robots were his first success." Kevin eyed the robots. They were humanoid in design but had longer than usual arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. "They're robotic, armored security personnel," Anata explained. "Q calls them RASPs for short. Stronger, faster, and more vigilant than any human security guard. They can be deployed with absolutely no risk to any human life." Before Kevin could reply, Anata tapped a few more keys. All 4 RASPs lunged at Kevin at once, deadly razor claws reaching out to cut Kevin to ribbons. Kevin rolled to the side. The claws missed him by inches, striking sparks off the garden stone pavers. The robots pursued him, lashing out with their heavy feet as well as their claws. Kevin dodged and spun. His mind raced as fast as his body, working out a plan in just seconds. Kevin dove into a planter full of tall, lush bamboo. It was excellent for cover, but terrible for seeing his attackers. He couldn't risk poking his head out to look around for fear of the robots spotting him. He reached out with his other senses, especially his hearing. The Raspies were fairly quiet, but it was impossible to completely muffle the sound of their metal feet on the stone pavers of the rooftop garden. In fact, one Raspy was approaching from his left. The noise was unmistakable, suspiciously unmistakable. Kevin reached out further with his excellent hearing. There, he heard two more Raspies getting into position on his right. They were setting Kevin up in a pincer movement so the one on the left could drive Kevin into the two on his right. If that's what they wanted, Kevin was happy to give it to them. Kevin jumped up before the Raspies were ready for him and ran right for the two on his right. He had caught the robots off guard. Perfect! Kevin jumped onto the edge of a high planter and off the wall of the metal garden shed, high into the air. He landed on the head of one Raspy. Kevin gripped the robot with his legs and rained down blows with his fists. It was no use. Despite Kevin's incredible strength and power, the Raspy's armor was too strong for him to even make a dent. Kevin pounded lower, looking for any kind of vulnerability, an unprotected plug, a weak joint, anything. But Q had designed the armored security personnel too well. The Raspy swiped at Kevin with his sharp claws, but the robot's long arms made it difficult to get the correct angle. The Raspy shook and swung, trying to dislodge Kevin, but he held on tightly as the second Raspy approached, claws raised high. If Kevin couldn't damage the robot on his own, he'd just have to get some help. Kevin waited until the last second and then leapt free of the Raspy he'd been riding. The second robot's claws slammed into its colleague's head. The claws were very sharp indeed and easily sheared through the metal head of the first Raspy. Kevin dodged the sparks flying from the robot that had nearly been decapitated by its compatriot. There was a sharp smell of ozone, and the damaged robot kneeled over, taking out a large planter of begonias on its way down. "That's one down," Kevin crowed in triumph. "And 3 to go," answered Anata. "There's no way you can defeat them all before I tell Q who you really are." She turned and ran for the stairs leading back down to the penthouse she shared with Q. Despite her pregnancy, she was graceful and fast. Anata was right. Kevin didn't have time to take out each robot individually. He needed a way to end this quickly. He raced ahead of Anata. "You can't get out that way," Anata yelled, thinking he meant to beat her back to Q. "I locked the door to the penthouse behind us. Only I have the key." But Kevin wasn't worried about that. Not yet. He leapt onto the low wall at the edge of the roof. It was covered with graceful, trailing ivy that poured over the side of the skyscraper. Anata pointed the 3 remaining Raspies at Kevin. "What are you waiting for?" she demanded. "Get him!" The Raspies charged. Their deadly claws were only 3 feet away when Kevin stepped back and dropped out of sight into the thin, warm air of Tokyo's night. The Raspies had too much momentum to stop. They hurtled over the edge of the building and plunged 100 stories down, to smash into harmless pieces on the alley pavement. Anata ran to the wall and looked out and down to see what had become of her robot security guards. And that's when she saw Kevin skillfully clinging to the ivy that flowed down the side of the building. He grinned up at her. "I don't think that took me nearly as long as you thought it would." Kevin indicated the smashed Raspies below with a jerk of his head. Kevin began to climb back up the ivy to the safety of the roof. This whole incident had taken him far longer than he could afford. Lily was waiting for him back in Chicago. He had made her a promise, and he always kept his promises. That's when Anata pulled a tiny knife from the pocket of her kimono robe and slashed at the ivy Kevin was clinging to. The ivy parted easily for the sharp blade. Kevin fell backwards off the side of the skyscraper to join the smashed robots 100 stories below.